Hello everyone, so today we're going to discuss the autonomic nervous system. So let's get started with that. So before we go over the autonomic nervous system division, let's look at what we learned so far. So there's the primary division of the nervous system, central nervous system, which can be divided into brain and the spinal cord. So this area is where the information is processed, where the decisions are made and the commands are sent out, and also the information is received. And then we have another division, which is the peripheral nervous system. So this is everything outside of central nervous system. So this is going to include all the nerves that we learned about. So in last lecture, I talked about some major nerves, femoral nerve, sciatic nerve, some of the brachial plexus nerves. Peripheral nervous system can be divided into sensory division and motor division. Sensory division, it can be further divided into visceral sensory division and somatic sensory division. So visceral is the inner organs, and somatic is the information coming in from the exoreceptors, so the skin and the skeletal muscle. That's the information coming in, and once the information comes in, the motor commands are sent out through the motor division, and that can be again divided into visceral and somatic. Somatic is going to go to skeletal muscle, visceral is going to go to inner organs. And then we talked about afferent, so the afferent division and efferent. So afferent is the information coming in. Sensory information comes in. Once the information comes in, it's processed, and then the commands, which is efferent division, are sent out. Now, visceral motor division can be further divided into autonomic nervous system. And it has two divisions, sympathetic division and parasympathetic division. So sometimes you'll see that people talk about three divisions, so sympathetic, parasympathetic, and enteric nervous system. I'm only going to talk about these two, so sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic is the fight or flight mode. Parasympathetic is the rest and digest mode. So sympathetic is going to kind of get you ready to fight or flee, and parasympathetic is going to calm you down. So before starting with the sympathetic and parasympathetic division, let's compare somatic nervous system with the autonomic nervous system. So in the somatic nervous system, there are voluntary muscle commands that are being sent out compared to autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system is automatic, so you're not controlling that consciously. So here, if we look at this picture in somatic nervous system, we had two divisions of the motor neurons. There was the upper motor neuron, and then there's the lower motor neuron. So this is carrying information from the cortex, primary motor cortex, which is the higher center in the brain. Then it's going to the spinal cord, and then here it's synapsing on to another neuron, and that's taking the information to the skeletal muscle. So this neuron right here is the interneuron that synapses on another neuron, and the information goes out. So we have the upper division neuron, and then we have the lower division motor neuron. So you have two examples that are being shown here. Now, when we compare this to the autonomic nervous system, we have an additional neuron in the chain. So let's look at that. And so here, what you can see, we have a neuron right here that's going to the spinal cord and is synapsing onto another neuron that's going to this thing called ganglia. And then there's another neuron that's going out to all the visceral organs or visceral effector organs, such as smooth muscle, glands, cardiac muscles, your heart, and then the adipocytes, so the adipose tissue as well. So now I just said that there is an additional neuron here. So again, if you look at here, two neurons, upper division, lower division. Look here, you have 1, 2, and 3 neurons. Now, because there's an additional neuron here, this is called preganglion. So you have the ganglia. This neuron comes before the ganglia, so that's preganglion. And then there's a neuron after the ganglia that's called postganglion. So we have two names. So we have preganglion neuron, and then we have the postganglion neuron. Ganglion, if you remember from my last lecture, I said is the collection of the cell bodies outside of the CNS. Brain is part of the CNS. Spinal cord is part of the CNS. This is outside the CNS, so this is called ganglia. And I mentioned something called dorsal root ganglion. So we called it ganglion because it's located outside of the CNS. So this is called ganglion. And again, the neuron that comes before. So the neuron that's going to enter the ganglion is called preganglion neuron. And the neuron that's going to leave the ganglion is called postganglion neuron. And these ganglia are found in different places depending on if it's sympathetic or parasympathetic division. And then the preganglion is myelinated and postganglion neuron is not myelinated. Okay, so let's talk about some of the functions of the autonomic nervous system. So this system, autonomic nervous system, is going to control all of the organs. So that can be respiratory, digestive, cardiovascular, reproductive. It's going to affect all of the organ systems. So for example, for respiratory, maybe there's an increase in oxygen levels or decrease in oxygen levels. That's going to be controlled by autonomic nervous system. For cardiovascular, maybe there's a high blood pressure or blood pressure goes down. That's controlled by autonomic nervous system. So interoceptors that we discussed, those bring information from the organs, and it's going to need that information in order to send out a command. Now this division, autonomic nervous system division, is under unconscious control. Now you're not aware of this. So you're not aware of the autonomic nervous system commands or the information that's coming in. But it is affected by conscious mind. So if you, let's say you're watching a scary movie and your blood pressure suddenly might go up, if something scary comes up, or your heart rate might go up. You're not aware of that, but that is affected by your conscious mind, something that you're aware of. So it's going to make any routine adjustments to your body systems, and then it's going to regulate the body temperature. So we said there are two divisions, sympathetic division and parasympathetic division. All of the organs in your body have innervation from both of these divisions. It has innervation from sympathetic division, and it also has innervation from parasympathetic division. So these two work together like accelerator pedal and the brake pedal. So one is going to speed things up, the other one is going to slow things down. So sympathetic is most active during stress time. So S, stress, S, sympathetic, or emergency. Let's say maybe you have to catch a flight and then you're getting late. So in that case, your sympathetic nervous system is going to be active. You're going to be stressing out. And then the parasympathetic division is going to try to calm you down. So that's going to be active during rest and digest conditions. That's your rest and digest division. Now we have two names here. We have thoracolumbar division and we have craniosacral division. You guys have seen these words before. Thoracal, thoracic, lumbar is the lumbar area. Cranial is the cranium or the cranial area, and then the sacral is referring to the sacral area. So what it says is that it's called thoracolumbar division. Sympathetic division is also known as thoracolumbar division, and the reason for that is that's where the neurons are coming off, or that's where the nerves are coming off in that area, and I'm going to show you a picture for that. Now parasympathetic division is known as craniosacral because that's where the location is for the nerves. And I said that all of the organs of the body have innervation from both of these divisions. So sympathetic neuron is going to be innervating, let's say, the heart, and the parasympathetic is also going to be innervating the heart. And that together is known as dual innervation. So organs are innervated by both divisions, sympathetic and parasympathetic. And these two divisions work opposite of each other, so antagonistic. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about the sympathetic division first, and then we'll go into parasympathetic division. So in last slide, I said this is known as also thoracolumbar division. So the neurons for the sympathetic division are located between T1, thoracic 1 vertebrae, and L2, lumbar 2 vertebrae. The cell bodies are in the ganglia. When we're saying ganglia, that means they are not in the spinal cord or the CNS. They're located outside of CNS, near the vertebral column. Those are called sympathetic chain ganglia because they're going to make a chain. And then there's also something called collateral ganglia. I'm going to show you what that is as well. And then there are specialized neurons inside the adrenal gland. So there is something unique about adrenal gland, which we're also going to discuss. It's a type of specialized organ, you can say. Okay, so these two divisions, as you know now, that they arise from different places in the spinal cord and the brain. Sympathetic division, and we said it starts from T1, thoracic 1 to L2. So that's where the location is for sympathetic neurons. So this is where it's emerging from. So the preganglion axons are going to arise from here, and then there are 3 sites where they can go. So most of them are going to go to the sympathetic chain ganglion. And that's paired, that means found on both sides of the spinal cord or the vertebral column. So I said most of them are going to head to the sympathetic chain ganglion for nerve connections that sit on both sides of the spinal cord. And then some of are going to go to the collateral ganglion, and the collateral ganglion is found in the abdominal cavity, so abdopelvic cavity. They're going to play an important role in regulating digestive tract. And then the last part, which is the adrenal medulla. So if you remember, we call outside of the brain cortex, and in the middle we have medulla, so we have same terms applying to the adrenal gland. Adrenal gland has the outside called adrenal cortex, and then the inner part is called adrenal medulla. So this adrenal gland sits on top of the kidney. It has multiple functions, and medulla acts as a sympathetic nervous system gland. It's going to release a neurotransmitter that's going to be released in the bloodstream, and it's going to affect all the organs that have receptors for that neurotransmitter. So this adrenal medulla is a type of modified ganglia, and it's going to work in the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. So again, this is going to affect organs and systems throughout the body, and the reason for that again is because the neurotransmitter is going to be released in the bloodstream. So here what I did, I kind of gave you a definition of each. So sympathetic chain ganglia sits on both sides of the vertebral column, also called paravertebral ganglia or lateral ganglia because it's to the lateral side of the vertebral column, so located on both sides of the vertebral column. Collateral ganglia, also called prevertebral ganglia, and these neurons are going to innervate the effectors in the abdomen pelvic cavity, so your digestive tract. Adrenal medulla, it's a modified sympathetic ganglia. It's going to release the hormones or neurotransmitters into the bloodstream. Okay, so let's go over what we just covered and in a little bit more detail. So starting with the location, sympathetic division, sympathetic neurons are located in thoracic and lumbar area. Then on the side of the spinal cord, both sides, we have this chain of ganglia. Ganglia is located outside of the central nervous system. And this is called sympathetic chain ganglia. In the beginning, we learned there's one additional neuron in the autonomic nervous system. So the neuron that comes before the chain ganglia is called preganglion neuron. Then it's going to enter the ganglia, and it's going to synapse to another neuron in the ganglia, and that's called postsynaptic neuron. So we have presynaptic, then we have the ganglia, then we have the postsynaptic. If you compare these, we are going to notice that it's going to have short preganglion fibers or neurons. So this is short compared to the post. So the post is going to be long ganglion neuron. Pre is going to be a short ganglion neuron. So the preganglion, when it synapses to the postganglion neuron, it's going to release a neurotransmitter. And the neurotransmitter that's going to be released here is acetylcholine, so ACH. And then it's going to, so that neurotransmitter is going to send action potential down the postganglion, and that's going to affect the organ. And then there's another neurotransmitter that's going to be released here. So that's going to be norepinephrine. In the sympathetic nervous system, the neurotransmitter that's being released by the preganglia is called acetylcholine. And you all know that acetylcholine is the excitatory neurotransmitter. It's going to cause an excitatory reaction. And that's going to synapse to another neuron that's called postganglion neuron. And then that neuron, when it goes to the organ, it's going to release norepinephrine. So norepinephrine is going to be excitatory, but sometimes it can vary depending on the type of receptor on the target cell. And then again, comparing preganglion with post, short preganglion neuron, long postganglion neuron. Now there's one neuron that you might notice that doesn't have a postganglion neuron, or at least you can't see it. So there's the long preganglion neuron. It's going to go attached to the adrenal glands. This is when I said that this is a specialized or modified sympathetic ganglion. it's going to go to the adrenal gland, and it's going to synapse in the medulla of the adrenal gland. So we'll talk about it a little bit more in upcoming slides. And this adrenal gland is going to release the neurotransmitter into the blood, and that neurotransmitter is going to affect all the target organs or all the organs that have the receptors for that neurotransmitter. And one last thing that I mentioned before, these preganglion fibers are myelinated and postganglion fibers are not myelinated. Okay, so sympathetic chain ganglia, now we know that it's located on both sides of the spinal cord. And preganglion neurons are going to be short and they're going to be myelinated. They're going to travel to the ganglion and they're going to travel through the white ramus communicans. So I'm going to show you that next. And then in the ganglion, they're going to synapse with a postganglion neuron. And that postganglion neuron is going to be long and it's going to be unmyelinated. And it's going to exit the ganglia via gray ramus communicans. Now, where these names white and gray are coming from, you guys remember we had a white matter and gray matter. And every time we talked about that, we said that in the gray matter, there are cell bodies located, and in the white matter, there is myelinated neurons. So same thing, since this is myelinated, it's going to give the white appearance. So that's why it's called white ramus communicans. There's a cell body located and it's unmyelinated, so it's going to be called gray ramus communicans. Then the postganglion is going to innervate the glands, smooth muscle, and blood vessels, and all the viscera in the head and thorax. Now I'm saying head and thorax because remember we're talking about sympathetic chain ganglia. When we talk about the collateral, then we're going to discuss the digestive organs. Okay, so what I just told you on the last slide, it's being shown here. So that's the spinal cord. And if you remember from last chapter, I kept saying there's a lateral horn, and that's found in the thoracic and lumbar area. So we are in thoracic and lumbar area, so there's the lateral horn there. And that's where the preganglion neuron is coming from. And then it's going to enter this part, which is known as sympathetic chain ganglion. It's going to come to the sympathetic chain ganglion. It's going to synapse to another neuron. Now, this neuron is myelinated. Therefore, it's called white ramus communicans. It's going to synapse here with a postganglion that's unmyelinated. So it's going to synapse with that, and it's going to exit. And then it's going to exit or leave the sympathetic chain by gray ramus. So gray ramus communicans, and it's going to join the spinal nerves and follow it to the target organ. So that's happening. So it's going to preganglion is going to the sympathetic chain ganglion, and the postganglion is leaving. So that's happening through the white and the gray ramus communicans. So now we have organs that are located above thoracic and lumbar region. So there are organs that are located below, or organs that are located above. So in that case, we have the preganglion neuron that's going to go to the sympathetic chain ganglion, and it's going to go up. So let's say it needs to go maybe to the neck. It's going to go up, that's called ascending. So it's going to go up and it's going to synapse with a postganglion in the upper chain ganglion. And then if it needs to go below, again, it's going to enter the sympathetic chain. It's going to come down, then the lumbar region, and it's going to synapse with a postganglion that can go to the organs that are located in the area that's below the lumbar 2 vertebrae. So that's ascending or descending. Okay, so since we discussed the sympathetic chain ganglion, that's where I said most of them are going. There's some that are going to collateral ganglion. And then there are bundles, which is going to be innervating most of the viscera in the abdominal pelvic region, so the digestive organs there. And then there is something called splenic nerves, and these are the bundles of preganglion fibers that do not synapse in this chain ganglion, and they converge onto collateral ganglion. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so this would be an example of a neuron, preganglion neuron, that is synapsing to another neuron in the sympathetic chain ganglion, and then it's re-entering the spinal nerve and exiting and going to the target organ. Then we have another neuron here that's not synapsing to a postganglion here, and it's going to go to something called collateral ganglion. So this is going to go to collateral ganglion, without synapsing. So let's look at a bigger picture of that. Okay, again, we're looking at the sympathetic nervous system emerging from thoracolumbar vision, and there is the sympathetic chain ganglion, and right now we're talking about the collateral ganglion, which means it's not going to go to the sympathetic chain ganglion and synapse. It's going to continue. It's going to go to the collateral ganglion. Collateral ganglion means there's a lot of nerves that are coming together and they're synapsing onto neurons in this ganglion. And these are known as splenic nerves. And then you can see that happening right here and then right here as well. So together they're called splenic nerves, and then this superior mesenteric ganglion. So there are a lot of nerves that are coming together and they're going to the collateral ganglion. And then in the collateral ganglion, they're synapsing onto post ganglion. And if you remember the superior mesenteric, you have heard this name before. And this is when the blood vessels were going to these organs. So when the superior mesenteric artery was going to these different organs, and you also heard the celiac word before, so that's when the blood vessels came out from celiac trunk. So not right now we have celiac ganglion. That's where these neurons are synapsing, and they're going to the organs located in that area. So again, we have preganglion, we have sympathetic chain ganglion, where it can synapse to the postganglion, which is happening for these ones. But they're not synapsing onto postganglion sympathetic chain. They're continuing, and they're doing that in the collateral ganglion here. And then it's continuing to the target organs. And these colors are representing preganglion fibers. So red are preganglion and black are postganglion. Okay, so the last one we have is the adrenal medulla. So this is the adrenal gland that sits on top of the kidney. We have a preganglion neuron that's coming down through the sympathetic chain ganglion, but it's not synapsing onto the postganglion. It is continuing, and it is going straight to the adrenal medulla. This adrenal medulla is a modified ganglion, you can say. There, you can't really see the postganglion outside the adrenal medulla, but you can see it right here. So this has a really long preganglion neuron or fiber, and then it has a short postganglion, which is located completely inside the organ and the region that's called adrenal medulla. This is a modified ganglion for sympathetic division. Okay, so just to give you overview, this is what we just covered. Celiac ganglion, the neurons that are going to synapse here, they're going to go to these organs: stomach, duodenum, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, spleen, and kidney. Superior mesenteric, it's going to innervate the small intestine, some parts of the large intestine, just like the blood vessels. Inferior mesenteric, that's going to innervate the large intestine mostly, kidney, urinary bladder, and the sex organs. And this is the same picture we just looked at. So I said in the beginning the type of neurotransmitter that's being released at the ganglion and then at the target organ. So if you remember, I said the neurotransmitter that's going to be released is acetylcholine right here in the sympathetic chain ganglion. So preganglion neuron is going to release acetylcholine, which is excitatory neurotransmitter. Since it's releasing acetylcholine, it's known as cholinergic. So acetylcholine is being released in the sympathetic chain ganglion here, or wherever it's synapsing on to the postganglion neuron. That's the first one. Now let's say the action potential is being sent out. The action potential travels through the preganglion. So the action potential travels through the preganglion, and it's going to release a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. This is known as cholinergic because the neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. Now that neurotransmitter is going to send another action potential down. So the release of the neurotransmitter sends an action potential down the postganglion neuron. So the action potential is going to go down the postganglion neuron, and it's going to release another neurotransmitter at the target organ. And the target organ can be the eye, the salivary glands, the heart, the lung, any of these. And the neurotransmitter that's being released there is called norepinephrine. So acetylcholine and norepinephrine. Because it's acetylcholine, it's known as cholinergic. So that's happening for these. And then we have one modified one, which was the adrenal medulla. So let's look at the neurotransmitter for adrenal medulla. For preganglion fiber, it's going to go to adrenal medulla, and it's gonna go through the celiac ganglion without synapsing into the sympathetic chain ganglion. It's going to release the neurotransmitters epinephrine and norepinephrine. And you guys might have heard about epinephrine as adrenaline. And this is when maybe you're late for an interview and your heart starts to beat really fast, and maybe your blood pressure increases. That's called adrenaline rush. So that's when the epinephrine is being released. Epinephrine is released most of the time, so that's 80% of the time, and maybe 20% is norepinephrine. And these are going to cause changes in the metabolic activities of the cells. Here I kind of gave you the overview or the summary of the sympathetic activation and what neurotransmitters are being released. So at the preganglion, we know acetylcholine is being released, and that's the reason it's called cholinergic synapse. Then that's going to cause stimulation of the postganglion, and the postganglion is going to release norepinephrine at the neuroeffector organ or the target organ, wherever it's going. And then sometimes some of the postganglion neurons can release acetylcholine, but most of the time it's going to be norepinephrine. This picture is showing you the sympathetic neuroeffector junction. On here you can see the axon is not really ending as a single axon terminal, it's branching. So there's a lot of extensive branching network that takes place, and it looks like string of beads, and that's called a veracosity. So these are called veracosities. It looks like beads. And these veracosities, they can pass along the surfaces of a lot of effector cells. What this picture is really showing that a single axon can affect dozens of cells. So we have the preganglion fiber, which is myelinated. That's why it's called white ramus communicans, what it travels through. Going to synapse in the ganglion to another postsynaptic, which is unmyelinated. And that axon is going to form a branching network that is going to be affecting a lot of cells together. And then here, this picture is zoomed in of these, bead-looking like structures. Inside these, you have the norepinephrine, which is released by postganglion neuron, and the mitochondria. So that was all for the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. Let's talk about the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system now. So parasympathetic division is also known as craniosacral division. Again, the reason for that is because the neurons emerge from the brainstem and the sacral segments. These are going to synapse with the postganglion neurons, same as the sympathetic division, but these are synapsing near the target organ, near the terminal, or within the target organ, which is known as intramural. Some of the functions of the parasympathetic division is relaxation, food processing, energy absorption. So when you're relaxing, and some major effects of the parasympathetic stimulation can be pupil constriction. So maybe when you're falling asleep. And then versus sympathetic, let's say you see a bear, it stresses you out, and that's going to cause pupil dilation. It's going to increase the production from the salivary glands, versus sympathetic, if let's say you have to give a speech to 200 people, you're going to start getting dry mouth. So that's your sympathetic division in action, versus parasympathetic, it increases the salivary glands production. Then we have the gastric glands. So when you're resting, you're digesting food, gastric glands are going to be active. Then you have the digestive organs. These are going to be active because you rest and digest. So you're resting, and these glands are producing the enzymes and the mucus for digestion. And then I listed a few more functions. So secretion of hormones that promote nutrient absorption. So when you're digesting food, increase smooth muscle activity of the digestive system. So the food is moving along. That's part of the digestion. Stimulation and coordination of defecation. Contraction of the urinary bladder. And also constriction of respiratory passages, reduced heart rate, you're relaxing, and then the sexual arousal. Sexual arousal is inhibited during sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so I said parasympathetic division is also known as craniosacral division. The neurons are emerging from the cranial part of your body and the sacral part of your body. The nerves that are coming off of the cranial part are oculomotor, Roman numeral 3, facial 7, glossopharyngeal 9, and then vagus, which is 10. So what are you going to notice that these nerves are going to single organs here. So these nerves are going to 1 or 2 organs. But when you look at vagus nerve, that is going to go to most of the organs. So this is covering about 75% of the organs, I would say. So here you can see it going to the heart, the lungs, the liver, stomach, pancreas, small and large intestine, kidneys, urinary bladder, reproductive organs. Now, another thing I would like to compare here is the preganglion and postganglion fibers. So that's the preganglion fiber, and it's synapsing onto a postganglion, which is really small here. Postganglion fibers here. So another thing that's different is the ganglia. So for the sympathetic division, the ganglia was located close to the spinal cord or the vertebral column. Here we do have the ganglia, but it's located near the target organ, not near the vertebral column. And the neurotransmitter that's being released here at the synapse of the postganglion fiber is acetylcholine. So we had same neurotransmitter being released in the sympathetic, and then that neurotransmitter is going to send action potential to the postganglion fiber, and that's going to go to the target. That's going to go to the target organ and release another neurotransmitter. Neurotransmitter that's being released at the target organ is acetylcholine again. So all the postganglion fibers are releasing acetylcholine at the neuroeffector junctions, so at the target organs. And the effect it's going to have is inhibitory versus a sympathetic division, which has an excitatory effect. But again, it may vary for some of the organs. So again, we have preganglion fiber, the ganglia, and the postganglion fibers that are going to the target organ. In this division, we have long preganglion fibers that are releasing acetylcholine, and then short postganglion fibers that are also releasing acetylcholine when they get to the target organ. So acetylcholine here, and then the acetylcholine at the target organ. Here we have the same picture, just a little bit more detail. So again, cranial nerves that are coming off of the brainstem are oculomotor, facial, glossopharyngeal, vagus. Vagus is going to the most of the organs, and then there are some nerves that are coming off in the sacral area. Neurotransmitter that's being released here is acetylcholine, so it's cholinergic, and then the neurotransmitter that's being released here at the target organ is also acetylcholine, so that's again cholinergic. And it's going to cause inhibitory effect here, so constriction of the pupils versus sympathetic, that's dilation of the pupils, increase in the salivary gland production, in saliva production, versus sympathetic, that's going to decrease the production. It's going to decrease the heart rate, sympathetic is going to increase it. In lungs, you're going to be more relaxed versus in sympathetic where you're breathing maybe really fast. And then it's going to increase the enzyme production in the digestive organs. And here I just wrote down everything for you. So cranial nerve, Roman numeral 3, is going to the intrinsic eye muscles. It's going to cause constriction of the pupils in the parasympathetic division. Cranial nerve number Roman numeral 7 going to pituitary glands and salivary glands. 9 is going to the parotid-salivary glands, and then we have 10 that's going to all the visceral organs of the thoracic cavity and the abdominal cavity, so accounting for about 75% of the all parasympathetic outflow. And then the parasympathetic neuron in the sacral region leave through the pelvic nerves to the visceral organs in the inferior portion of the abdominopelvic cavity. A few more things I mentioned was the preganglion, postganglion fibers are releasing acetylcholine at the synapse, so in the ganglia, and at the target organ. And since they're releasing acetylcholine, they're cholinergic. This picture is showing you the sympathetic chain ganglion on the side of the vertebral column, and it's also showing you the contralateral where it's coming together. So this is just to show you the distribution of the autonomic nervous system plexuses in the thoracic cavity and also the abdominal cavity. This is a summary picture when we're comparing the sympathetic with the parasympathetic nervous system. So for both of these, there's a preganglion neuron that's coming off of the spinal cord, which is part of the CNS, your central nervous system. Leaves the spinal cord, it's going to be myelinated. Both of them is going to be myelinated. It's going to go to sympathetic chain ganglion for the sympathetic nervous system. Now some of them also going to the collateral ganglion, and then there's the modification for the adrenal gland as well. But anyways, so they're going to go to the ganglia, whether it's collateral or sympathetic chain ganglia. They're going to release a neurotransmitter there. So these are black arrows. They're representing acetylcholine. So they're going to release acetylcholine there. And then the postganglion, which is unmyelinated. And then the postganglion, which is unmyelinated, that's going to release the norepinephrine, which is represented by these green arrows in the target organ. Now this is representing the adrenal gland. So this is going, preganglion fiber is going to the adrenal medulla, and it's going to release norepinephrine and epinephrine directly in the bloodstream. These hormones or the neurotransmitters are going to affect all the organs that have receptors for it. Now parasympathetic, we again have the preganglion coming off of the spinal cord, which is part of the CNS. Myelinated preganglion fiber is going to go to the ganglion that's located near the target organ, versus here ganglion is located near the spinal cord. It's going to release a neurotransmitter there, acetylcholine, and that's going to send an action potential down the postganglion fiber, which is really small compared to the sympathetic division. That's going to release the neurotransmitter to the target organ, which is going to be acetylcholine again. So short preganglion, long postganglion, and acetylcholine is released here, cholinergic, and norepinephrine is being released here. Norepinephrine and epinephrine is being released in the bloodstream through the adrenal medulla. Long preganglion, short postganglion, acetylcholine is being released at both of the sites. This chart is from your book. It's going to show you the location where the neurons for sympathetic and parasympathetic are emerging. So thoracic to lumbar area, and then the brainstem, so cranial, and the sacral area. The ganglia, so something that's outside of the CNS, it's located near the vertebral column for sympathetic division, known as sympathetic chain ganglia. There's also collateral ganglia. And then there is the modified adrenal medulla for the sympathetic division. Parasympathetic, these are going to be located near the target organs, and that's the reason there is a smaller postganglion for the parasympathetic. Next part is showing you that. So length for the preganglion is short for sympathetic, and it's long for parasympathetic, and they're both myelinated. Neurotransmitter being released by the preganglion fibers, acetylcholine for sympathetic, acetylcholine for parasympathetic. Postganglion fiber length for sympathetic is long and it's unmyelinated, and it's short for parasympathetic and it's unmyelinated. And the neurotransmitters release most of the time norepinephrine, and if it's adrenal medulla, it's going to release norepinephrine and epinephrine. And the neurotransmitter being released by the postganglion of the parasympathetic division is acetylcholine, so cholinergic. And then in the parasympathetic, we saw that sometimes there are precocities, which are branching network that can affect a lot of target cells. And don't worry about the degree of divergence. And then the general functions of the sympathetic, they're going to stimulate metabolism, so this is excitatory response, increase alertness, prepare for emergency, fight or flight response. Parasympathetic, it's going to promote relaxation, nutrient uptake, energy storage, so rest and digest is the function. Here I wrote some points so you can compare sympathetic and parasympathetic division, and it'd be easier if you make a chart and kind of list the differences with some descriptions. Previous chart is just giving you the bullet points, compare the length of preganglion, postganglion fibers, the location, and different types of ganglia. So the sympathetic chain ganglia, collateral ganglia, and then the modified adrenal medulla. Compare the neurotransmitter being released, but don't worry about the degree of divergence. So that's it for the autonomic nervous system. Next chapter is special senses. That's our last chapter for the semester.